Welcome to the Create the Life You Want podcast, where we break down the journey of people just like you going from dream to ownership in business acquisitions, franchises, and startups. I'm your host, Jeremy Ames. Today's episode is brought to you ad-free by Guidant Financial. Guidant is America's leading company helping aspiring entrepreneurs use retirement funds to buy or start businesses. If you're committed to buying or starting a business, you can find out more about your funding options by going to www.guidantfinancial.com. That's Guidant financial.com. Now, let's get started with the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Create the Life You Want podcast. Today, I am joined by Jason Cohen. Jason spent many years in the corporate world as a CFO and CEO, and then decided he wanted to pursue a path of happiness and fulfillment as a business owner. And so we're going to get a chance to dig into that evolution for Jason, find out more about his business and some of the things he's learned along his journey. So Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Jason, let's start with your former life. What did you do for so many years before you decided to make a crazy investment in becoming a business owner?
So I spent the first 25 years of my career in agricultural commodities. So sugar, coffee, cotton, cocoa, grains, everything in agriculture. And basically we traded on the futures exchange, and we also moved the product around the world. So I spent many years in different positions across all those commodities. I traveled the world, and we basically were the sourcing and the distributor of those products.
Interesting. Did you have to travel a lot for work doing that?
Yeah, lots of travel. I spent a lot of time globally traveling all over Europe, Asia, some weird places. Even like we went to Haiti a bunch of times, in South Africa. So lots of traveling, and we had teams around the world. So we were a pretty big organization.
Got it. And did you always know or think you might want to be an entrepreneur? Help us understand when that thought even started to occur to you seriously.
Yep. For basically since the beginning. So this job was a great job. My career was unbelievable. It was a great experience, but I never had the fulfillment of doing it myself. And I always felt like I could do this myself. I don't need to be working in the corporate world. And I went through that whole thing for many, many years. And probably the last 7 years of my corporate life, I basically was on the pursuit of finding the right business and what my passion was.
Wow. So what kept you hooked for 20 years, first of all?
It's basically security. You have the security of a job and benefits. And it's hard to, I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was trying to do a baseball program, that was always my dream, building a baseball program or a softball program. I have three boys, 15 and 13. They're all into sports and athletic. And what happened was, especially in Westchester, where I am in North New York, it's very hard to find a facility that, for two things. One is you have to have a facility with no a turf space that has no poles, high ceilings, and you either could build a bubble or you find a building that works. And what was happening is I went in front of town boards, I tried to find real estate, and every time it got tough or it got down to the wire where it was a really tough negotiation, I always had the crutch of the corporate world. So until you put yourself out there and say, hey, I'm doing this, it was always easy to fall back. So I always had this security, a good paycheck, good benefits, knowing that I had a job. That's what keeps you going in that world. And it didn't fulfill my passion, basically.
So it wasn't fulfilling your passion, and you were deep in baseball with the boys, which I understand well. I coached a club baseball team for many years until I retired when my son aged out. And it is very difficult to find indoor space. And so that makes it very challenging when you're in a place where the winter is legitimately bad.
Exactly.
As it is in New York. So for 7 years, you thought, I'm going to do this. What took so long, and what did you try during that 7 years?
So it's a great question. So I think it was always about, first, how do you start? How do you start getting? You have to get players, you have to get coaches, you have to get a reputation. Why someone will come to you to build an organization? Then you got to find the space. So which comes first was always the challenge. And what I always focused on was I don't think I could ever build a program until I had a facility. And for those years, literally all not consistently, I was always looking for the space, never found the space, right? Even if I found it, there was something wrong with it or it didn't quite work. And the funny thing, the way it really changed was about 2.5 years ago. It's a pretty funny story. There was three things that made me do this. One is I was actually hanging out with a bunch of my friends, and my older son, he was probably 13 at the time. He sees us all sitting around. Everybody's talking about their jobs and complaining and stuff like that. And he walks over to us and he says, you guys are full of, because all you do is tell us to go for your dreams and none of you do it. And I was like, wow, I can't believe you just said it to me. It's so true. It like killed me. And I kept thinking about it. And my wife is a therapist, so she was always pushing me to do this. And then the third thing, so all these things happened at pretty much at the same time. The third thing was I actually read a study that talked about, it was basically a study of approximately, I think, 2,000 people. They were in hospice care. And they asked the question is, what's your biggest regret in life? And it was never, I think it was like 99% of the people didn't say something they did. It was always about something they didn't do. Right. So like you hear that, you say it, but do you really live like that? So everyone would be like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that you know, they never really cared about things they did. So I took those things and I really went on this journey. So basically about over 2 years ago, I quit my corporate job. I basically it was actually a turning point. It was private equity owned us. Long story short, they were gonna close down the business and wind it down. And I went on this entrepreneur journey. And why I'm trying, this was always my passion. I ended up owning a plumbing business. I ended up starting an NFT fund. I did this entrepreneur journey just to figure out what I wanted to do until this came along, which was probably like 7 months after I got out of the corporate world.
Interesting. So you had been thinking about this for years and years and years. Your teenage son calls you onto the carpet, and then you make a commitment to quit your job, but you had to
Yep.
fumble through a few different ideas before you sort of found your way back to the thing that you were originally thinking you wanted to do many years ago.
Correct. It was basically all in. Basically, there was no paycheck. There was it was time to fight. You know, like I knew I had it in me. I had the biggest business acronym. I was CFO for years, so I wasn't concerned with the business. It was finding my passion. So I could find any job. I could buy any job. I could buy a restaurant. I could do any. That wasn't the issue. It was what was going to truly make me happy, and that took a long time. So it definitely wasn't the plumbing business. It definitely wasn't this NFT fund. It was that this. And then why I'm doing this, I'm pursuing, and I randomly, the way this all happens, I randomly called the guy at a different facility saying, hey, do you have some space? I just wanted to like hear him out a little bit. And he's like, why don't you meet me at this space, what I own now? And when I walked in the next day, this is all within 24 hours. She's like, do you want to buy it? And literally that's like how life just happened. And then we went on an 8-month negotiation, and that's how this all happened. Literally like that.
Yeah, I think there's an important lesson in what you just shared there, Jason. It's, earlier you said you had to just sort of make the commitment to start to make progress. And then it was the key of just starting to reach out and talk to people that led to an opportune, the thing you've been looking for years just suddenly showed up in front of you once you started
That's
putting it
right.
out there. So
100%.
tell me a
This,
little bit, tell us
sorry.
a little bit about the plumbing business and the NFT business that didn't work out.
So the plumbing business was basically one of my best friends owns a commercial plumbing business in New York City. And then he moved to Florida, and there was this opportunity. It's a little complicated. It was an opportunity in Florida to do it. And the problem we built it, it was successful to a degree. The problem was the the employees. It was very hard to get employees, very hard to get plumbers. So there's only so much growth you could do when you have the support around you. So that was the biggest challenge. And then the truth was I didn't believe in it, right? I didn't have the passion. So like I went into it, I did it with him, and I just didn't. Getting up every morning wasn't the passion of building this thing. And with the NFT, I went really far along with an NFT fund, building an NFT fund because it didn't exist at the time. I was very into NFTs and crypto, just studying it and learning. And I really believe in what NFT stands for, not necessarily the photos, the NFT, but the concept of NFTs. And I never launched it, even though we had money raised, because I just couldn't believe, I didn't believe in it. I just couldn't grasp the concept after a time. So that's how those ended. It's really comes down to passion, relationships, and believing in what you're doing. And I didn't have any of that for those two businesses.
Yeah, so if I reflect back to you, it sounds like with the plumbing business, it was opportunistic. You had a buddy who
Correct.
had this situation and moving to Florida where there's a chance for you to get integrated into a business, and you went in and you started trying to build this thing, and you found you weren't excited to get up in the morning. So how did you exit yourself from that?
So it was a good wind down. So basically, it's one of those things like you could pull the plug quickly because we didn't have long term contracts. It was like we did from colleges, we did residential commercial. So it was easy to say, hey, just now, at some point in time we had like a 3 month landing space, and we just slowly wound it down.
Got it.
It was a very easy wind down. There was no debt. There was nothing. It was very simple.
Got it. And then you went down the NFT path. Sounds like this was a little different in that you're raising money from investors to get this thing off the ground. And then you get to the proof point where you've got to start to launch something. And did you just give everybody their money back and say, I'm
We
realizing
had
I'm not
commitments.
all
Yeah. So we basically had commitments, but didn't take the money yet. So it's basically, yes, I'll
got
do
it.
it. And we had commitments, and we had the legal process. And the volatility, the behind the scenes of us trying to really guess this, it was just legalized gambling to me at that point. And I believed in the concept, but not what the money side of it. And that I couldn't
Yeah.
get myself from a moral perspective to do it.
Okay. And so then you let the NFT thing go. You reach out to this guy who has a facility. And I guess at this point, you're just trying to pick his brain and understand, hey, can I use your facility for a few hours to start to build some clientele out? And he
Correct.
says, why don't you buy my business? And then
Well,
walk
he
us
said
through.
this. Yeah, so what happened was he managed that business and owned the business where I am now. He had two places, and he told me to come to the second place, and we sit down, and I'm trying to think if I've been here, and I think eventually I realized I was here, and I realized he's just like, hey, you want to buy it? And because what happened for him was he owned the real estate and the business, and they bought the real estate 5 years ago or 6 years ago. They never really wanted to run the business. They wanted the real estate. So the operation business is a whole different animal. They wanted to sell the business side, and not necessarily the real estate side. So that's when it was an opportunity, and I jumped all over it. It was a long negotiation, but it took us 8 months to negotiate it.
Yeah, well, talk us a little bit through that process, because I think this is a question a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs have. So you get somebody who might want to sell their business. How do you figure out what it's worth? And then how do you negotiate to a deal that's going to make sense?
So it's a great question. So the assumptions matter, right? So for me, I had to build what my belief was, my assumptions. I could take theirs. I took theirs and how they came up with their revenue, how they came up with their expenses, and I tried to stress it. Basically, in my eyes, was what can I do more? What weren't they doing, and where was the opportunity? And then I came up with my own conservative, aggressive, and super aggressive, like stressing it. Like, how many hours can I really rent out the turf field, the basketball field? Can I build a program? How many more gym members can I get? Because we have all these different things. We have about 40 revenue streams in the facility, and I kept looking at each one and saying, what can I do better? And then when I got to a point where I said, wow, just on my conservative level, this is what I believe it is, they had a price in mind. The price was a nice multiple for them, but what they were making was not what I thought it should make. So they thought they were getting a great deal. I thought I was getting a great deal. So it was a perfect atmosphere. So their multiple was based on what they were making, which I was like, fantastic, because I didn't see them. What they were making was not what it should make.
Yeah, well, a couple things to highlight there. One, that's how the math is supposed to work, right? So I'm curious why it took 8 months if that was the case. If they
So
have
it's
a
it.
multiple and you can see opportunity that's so much greater, what took so long for the deal to come together?
Yeah. So that's always a challenge. So, and it's never condescending at all. It was not a contentious negotiation, and I'm not to be condescending, but like I had a more business acronym, right? So I'm from business world, so you have to realize who your sellers are or your buyers are, and they were more. There's so many nuances to this. There was also the idea of I had to negotiate a lease, I had to negotiate the right to buy this place because that's part of our negotiation. What the value was. So who's responsible for the air conditioning? Who's responsible for the heating? It just there's so many little
Okay.
parts to it, and legal and financing, and there's a lot to it, and it just it takes time. It just I would say the last 3 months until you get to the final, we were probably 90% there. So it's probably a 5 month of back and forth on a million different topics. And people sometimes dig their feet in, which is an interesting concept watching this. And I always watch people dig in for the interesting reasons, which I never understood. Such small things that cause such big refs. Like, for instance, one of the things was who's responsible for the elevator in here? I was like, well, you go back and forth 100 times on these little things, so it could take a week before someone's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. You own it. Why am I like So like you have to be flexible. You have to put your foot down when you want to put your foot down, but you also have to be reasonable. So it was just about coming to a common ground over on many, many issues.
Yeah, well, the complexity I'm hearing you line out is you're simultaneously negotiating to buy the business and negotiating to occupy the premises. And
Right.
depending on how one of those negotiation goes, you probably move some of the variables in the other part of it, right? They care
That's
more about the
exactly
real
right.
estate and what that ongoing cash flow is going to look like, and you care more about how much money am I putting in and what am I obligated to in the long run.
That's right. There was three components, right? I had to negotiate the price of the business, the lease with them, and then the option to buy it. So it was all looped in and I wanted that was also one of the things. I wanted a very, very long lease, forever, basically a forever lease,
Yep.
with the right to buy. And their objective is to sell it, and I'm their
Yep.
buyer. So it was just a matter of papering this the right way. So we ended up with me having a 30-year lease with some options in there to walk out, but I also wanted the opportunity to buy it. So I have the first right to buy it. So it was all these like, and then how long you can go on and on if you think about each component of that, like the right to buy it. So how many months do I have if someone comes in a deal? How long do I have to come back? Do I have 30 days,
Yeah.
6 days? You can go on and on. It gets very cumbersome, and that's the time limit. That's what takes the time. Each part of this.
Let's talk about the third leg of that stool, the option to buy, because I think this is something a lot of new business owners look past. And it's both a really potentially critical opportunity to protect the security of the business, right? Because the cost to improve a space is significant. It's a significant investment that is very expensive to move. And second of all, it provides a really interesting opportunity as the business becomes more successful to add another asset that's not perfectly correlated with the business, meaning even if the business goes to
Right.
zero, there's something that's still of value there. So walk through
Correct.
how you got there, how open they were or weren't to that idea from the start, and then what you did to get them over the hill.
It's very interesting. What I find is we have 5 tenants in here too. We have other that people rent inside the facility, and I always find it interesting that their first negotiation point is they want the right to get out, and I'm always the opposite. I'm like, you give me time. If you believe in this, I don't want a year. I want you to give me 30 years. I have the questions where, how about I just do a year? I'm like, wow, if you believe in if that business a year, that's like nothing. You're giving me basically you're giving me the power to get rid of you after a year of your business. Like I want the ability to have continuity. That was my first thing. So I knew I needed to own the building for a forever business. That's how I looked at this. This is a forever business. The asset is also, like you said, it's a de-risk thing, right? It has nothing to do with my business in theory. You can use this space. You can make this 40,000 square foot into a car dealership if you needed to at some point. You don't have to have it as a gym or turf. So it's also a way to hedge this a little bit. And also, if I'm going to pay all this rent, I would like some equity. So you're also building a future asset with the equity. So there was a lot of components to that. And when the key to these negotiations was finding out what did they really want. So we spent a lot of time in nice, good meetings, and I'm always trying to figure out what's the win-win. What makes them happy? What are they trying to win about? And I play this all day, like, oh, that's what they want. Then let me lean to that. I was trying to figure out, and they want to sell it, and they want to build some equity. They want another 5 or 6 years. So I just played into that and made sure that I was meeting what they were trying to do. And I knew, and my objective is to own this place.
Yeah.
Somehow, some
So
at some point.
maybe give us a little bit more detail on what you uncovered that they really wanted and how you use that as a way to massage the deal to match with what you wanted to get out of the deal.
So their biggest concern was two things. One is the ability for me to pay it, right? I'm a startup in theory. I was coming in here.
Yep.
Yes, you can use the space any way you want, but they had to believe in the baseball program. They had to believe in a lot of things I was trying to do. So that was just getting them comfortable with my ideas, and they wanted to see my business plan. So they get comfortable as a tenant. And then the next thing was saying, what will make you happy? And the pricing point, like we started at one point, it was very interesting. We started to say, all right, I'll buy it now because one of the owners, there's three main owners, and they had a bunch of investors. One of the owners was like, all right, buy now. And it's always that first throw of the price was just, okay, that's not even in the realm of reality right now. So let's table that. So it was more about them first wanting to say, let me get a lotto ticket. And this is not, I wasn't willing to pay the lotto ticket. So then I was negotiating and say, hey, you can, at any point you want to sell, I'm here. And if any point someone else comes, you have me as a backdrop to say, I want to buy it. So they were getting that, and they were getting a tenant at the same time that they could trust. So that was what their biggest thing. And I had to keep convincing them of my business model and also the ability that I'm going to be
Yeah.
their future buyer.
Yeah. So what did you ultimately end up negotiating in terms of the purchase of the company and how did you finance it?
So okay, so the purchase of the company was it was a separate, it was like three separate deals in my eyes, right? So even though
Okay.
I was making each, like you said, each one mattered for the other one, but I didn't want to link them together. So when I did the business side, the way we finance, so I went down a bunch of routes, and a lot of them I didn't like. For instance, the SBA loans are fantastic. They give you the ability to be a small business owner. The problem is you have to personally guarantee it, and I have a big issue with commingling the two. With family and stuff, I wasn't willing to personally finance it. So that I was really doing as a last resort. The next thing I did was what I did was called a ROBS transaction, which was through Guidance, which was brilliant and one of the best things I ever did, which we could talk about. And then the third thing is really seller financing. So throughout this process, part of the 8 months, it was also seller financing, which was interesting because one of these conversations, one of the main owners said to me, I don't want to take all this money up front. It's going to be too tax heavy for me. I would love to spread it across. And then my wheels started getting, okay, there we go. That's what I needed. So I have a seller finance agreement with the one guy, and the rest got paid out in the first payment. So I paid a certain amount up front, which was my money from the ROBS transaction. I seller financed the rest, basically, with this one guy.
Let me take a step back here because I want to point out something you said that I think is really powerful. That people may be underutilizing when they're thinking about negotiating with a seller is that you talked with the seller about the tax implications. And if somebody's selling their business and they get a big chunk of money, they are going to be at the highest possible tax bracket depending on how the allocation of the funds go to a purchase. So you were able to leverage that into some seller financing. So maybe you could back up for a second and tell us with the transaction. Sounds like you moved away from the SBA financing because you didn't like the idea of having to have the personal guarantee where even if it went south, you were still going to end up paying the money, but then you got the interest on top as well. So you went
Yep.
with a combination of a ROBS and some seller financings. How much did you bring to the table, and how much were you able to get seller financed with that one
So
owner?
I would say it was about 60% me and 40% from the seller finance. And the seller financing piece, the angle was what I wanted to do is give him security. Like, besides all this, we can do business transactions. There's a moral thing that sometimes you have to do what's right in life, and you have to, your word's your life, and he doesn't know my word is my life. So like for us, it was really about, I will give you back the business. You'll end up you'll have the business back, so your risk is very little in that component. So the key was to figure
Got
out
it.
from a tax perspective, how far out did he really want this money? And when he gave me a range, that's what I used to negotiate the interest rate, the range, and like making him get what he wanted and know that if I didn't pay him on that yearly basis, he can get back the business.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, you said the ROBS was the best thing that you had done. Maybe you could help us understand why did that work particularly well for you in your situation?
It's actually it's a brilliant thing that very few people knew about, right? So like I did my own research, I found it, and then I found Guided, and honestly, not to just plug it, but you guys were amazing. So, and I think Michael Stein is one I dealt with. It was fantastic. So the idea was that when I was in the corporate world, especially at the beginning of my career, I was with a company that matched 100% of my 401k. It was absolutely unbelievable
Oh,
benefit.
wow.
So I had a nice a lot of I would say a lot of my net worth was in my 401k. But you can never buy a business with your 401k or your IRA. Either you can, your parents can, your children can, your wife can, and the only way to do it is through the Rob's transaction. So when I started researching this, I said this is a perfect way to use a lot of that money. So at the end of the day, when I said the 60/40, I would say the 60% had part Rob's, part my own money. So there's basically the owners of my company right now is me and my 401k, which is the Rob's transaction.
Got it. So it sounds like for you, what made it a particularly good fit is you had gone so aggressive with your investments into your 401k plan because of this company matching that was done. So you had a disproportionate amount of your assets in this one place that
Absolutely perfect.
normally you can't access. And so this gave you the ability to leverage some of those funds in the transaction. So you bought this company. It took you 8 months to get this thing negotiated.
hmm
And I'm curious, when you thought about the multiple they were asking for, and you said you had sort of done your own analysis about what you thought you could create, how did you think about and come up with the ideas where you're like, here is where I believe we can add some value to this business and make it worth far more than what I'm buying today?
Yeah, I think a lot of what I did was saying, what were they not utilize? What was they underutilizing? So I didn't try to like do more
Okay.
of what they were doing or saying I'm better than you and I could do better. It was more like, hey, you didn't even think of this component? There's a whole realm of things, and that's what I kept listing. There was a realm of things they weren't doing, and it was really just about putting in the time, relationship building. And I knew that there was such a demand for this. Like for my world of being in sports, there was such a demand for the turf, such a demand for the basketball courts. And the gym itself is just a natural thing. It's part of this place. And what I was trying to build here is a community, and we can talk about the business now. It's basically a community. You come here, and there's so much to do. So if like you drop your kids over baseball, you go to the gym. If you're dropping,
Yeah.
you can study as a physical therapist. There's strength and condition. There's an MMA studio. It goes on and on and on. We have velocity. We have Zumba and fitness classes. So it was building a different. It was basically putting some work into it because the place was a little run down. So we made it more modernized, and then it was more about saying, how do I build a community? So what I did was I started stressing that the reality of how to build a gym based on this community atmosphere, how to build more rentals in there, how to build my own internal program. So what this ended up being for me, it's almost like a WeWorks. So I do a lot of internal. So let's say we have 40 revenue streams. I would say 10 to 15% of it is my internal businesses, and everything else is a rental. So you can be a lacrosse program called Lacrosse A, and you want to rent it for 13 weeks here, and you'll pay me a rental fee, and I'm a WeWork. So it's a puzzle. So I was trying to figure out all the puzzles, and their puzzles weren't making sense to me, right? So like they would have like 3 weeks, and then they were off for 7 weeks because they didn't utilize that. No, I won't accept the 3 week contract. That you have to do 13 weeks. I started like figuring out a business model that I knew would work in the outside world and work for me, and that's the assumptions I made. It wasn't really the assumption saying, "Oh, I could do better than you. You're not doing it right." It was like, "Hey, I
Yeah.
think there's something more here."
Well, I want to back up and reinforce a couple things I think I heard from you. One was you were looking at the utilization of the assets, and you're thinking of the assets as, hey, you've got this turf field, hey, you've got this basketball court, hey, you've got this gym. How can we have these assets being used more frequently and not sitting there with nobody on them? And it
Exactly.
sounds like you went with a philosophy. There are other business models that do things like this too. You mentioned WeWork, but there are business models where, a landlord buys a space and then does the TIs around it for hairstylists or whatever, and then rents out
Yep.
those individual booths to
That's
those
right.
people. So
Yep.
you created this place for people who have businesses centered around athletics, whether that's running a lacrosse team or a club basketball team, or I'm assuming you do this with yoga and with Pilates and with some of these other things that people may have a business, so to speak, where they're doing it. And in the process, what you did was create this place where people didn't need to leave. And that really resonates with me because I've been a sports dad. And if you're not coaching, what ends up happening is you're driving your kids to these places and then you're trying to figure out, what do I do with the hour and a half that I have? Do I drive home and then have to do this drive back again? Or am I going to go run errands? Or am I going to sit here and watch this thing go on?
100% what you said. It's the stickiness. So like, there's a stickiness of our programs. There's the quality and all the basics that everyone thinks about. It was the stickiness of parenting. Like how you drop them off, it's an hour practice. So what we did on our internal programs, we also made the practices long, an hour and a half. We do winter workouts for 2.5 hours. We started realizing to help the families who have 3 kids or 2 kids and driving every which way, which was me and my wife. So we did that kind of stickiness. What I also did was empower entrepreneurs. So like, build a business in here. Let me help you. Let me help. We have marketing. We have a database of people. There's so much going through these doors. Sometimes we have 1,000 people in a day here. We could help each other build a business. And at the same time, a lot of times what I did with these new programs, whether it was lacrosse or field hockey, was I would offer a profit share, right? I would lower the rent, make it easier on them, but the ability to say we split after our cost, we split something. I come up with all these different formulas to help people, which it's a risk on me. And if I believe in the program, I'm going to do it. So what our business here is, like in the wintertime in here in New York, I can literally, I'm not just exaggerating, there's probably like 45 people, an organization on a wait list for the turf. Like I could fill it up three
Yeah.
more times if I had more space. So the idea is, how do I now monetize this further? So if you want, the way I pick these people is basically loyalty, right? If you're in my town, you're going to get loyalty. If you book outside the winter, you're going to get the winter. It's almost like that bonus chip. So it's like,
Yeah.
and then the stickiness, and then profit sharing with people. And if I believe in the business, if I think they have something going for them. So I started getting into it a little more than just renting it out.
Yeah, it's interesting. Another example of a business or a landlord that does that is airports, where they charge
Yes,
a rental fee and then they're taking a revenue share because they are bringing so much traffic by these stores. They want
yep,
to have a piece of what's there. And in doing so, they generate far higher rental rates than what would ever be market to charge someone on a monthly basis.
absolutely. And I think there's something you just reminded me. There was two major things that I helped grow with my business that I was just thought of, as you said. So when I first came in, part of my deal in those 8 months, which is actually something important that entrepreneurs to do, if you don't have a contentious negotiation, which is never a win-win. If you get the contentious, this may not work. What I agreed with the owners was, it was, I think we closed in April. When we were like 90% there, and it was all just the legality of garbage stuff going on. I said, let me sit there. Let me book business, because this business, if you can't turn it on and turn it off. I have to book forward or I'll have nothing. So I kept saying, let me run it. And if I book things in February, March, it's your money. I'm not trying to take it. If we start something in February, it goes to July, you get the money. Let me start running it, because I knew they were not really doing it as much. And they said, fine. So I would sit here and I would observe all the time. And a lot of the employees didn't know who I was. I was just like sitting around. It was also pretty creepy, actually. But I was really just learning and observing. And then when I started the business, what I realized their model was, and I get it, was everything was a fee, right? Everything costs money. You come in here, you want to use the gym, fee, this fee. And I kept saying, here's what we're going to do. So I started the business. I did two things. One is, everything's free. It's a very crazy concept. And the belief was, if I do what's right, and if I don't follow money and I follow passion and quality, they're going to come back. So I kept saying to myself, okay, you want to take a baseball lesson? You want to rent my basketball court one time? You win. You just took $100 from me. You won. Or you want to do the gym? Usually you get a daily pass. You want to come here for a week? Come here for a week, and then you're not working out anymore. Fine, you won again. And I kept having this concept. Long story short, I tracked everything. That was my business acronym side. Was like, tracked everything. We had a 99.8% return rate, and I realized was why people were returning was, one, quality. There's actually a crazy phenomenon about the guilt conscious, right? So everyone's like, well, he gave me all these free things. I feel like I might have to join him. Maybe I should take another one. And I knew the quality was going to be there for all our programs. And it ended up being, everyone was coming back. And the second most powerful thing that I always say to people is, so what I have some professional players, baseball players, that are actually in our baseball program. And when I first started a couple of years ago, we were going to do an infield clinic with one of the guys who played professional ball with the Marlins, and he put on his hat and we promoted it a little bit. I never paid for marketing, which we could talk about in a second, and we got it out there, and there were some people coming. And then I was thinking to myself, obviously, I have 15-year-old and 13-year-old. They were a little younger then. I said, I have all the dads, all their kids play baseball. Why don't I just tell them to come? And it wasn't about the money. I said, just to get the people hearing about it, and I knew it was going to be good. So I would go up to my friends' dads and I'd be like, yo, bring Stevie, bring Johnny, bring everybody, come. Don't worry about the money, just come in. It'll be a great infield clinic. I knew the quality was going to be there. And after like a week or two, there wasn't that many people coming. I kept thinking, it's my boys. What's going on here? Why is nobody coming? What I changed is one word. All I had to do was say, I need help. Hey, help me out. Can you bring your boys? I need help. Like, help me out. The power of help blew this business up because people always have that feeling of help rather than, yeah, I'll get there. My boys will come. If it's free, they'll come. And they didn't see what I was trying to get. I was like, no, I need your help. I need to show there's 15, 20 kids in here. I knew it was good, but I needed to get it off the ground. That help factor has created a whole dynamic of helping, and it always turns into a monetary experience from the business side. So it's just those two things when you were saying to us just really changed this business model big time for me.
Love that. Would love to have you explain a little bit more about how your model of, because I think when you say everything's free, what you're really saying is you can try before we ask you to buy. So how do you think about that across the various things you do? What have you tested and what have you found works really well?
So I think the idea is that like the first thing when I went to my manager and started saying everything's free, it's exactly what you said. It's not necessarily always free. It was the concept of free, like test it out. And the idea was, well, people are going to take advantage. And I kept saying, I'm going to believe in the human element. Yeah, there's going to be one or two we're going to laugh at and say, how many times is this guy going to come? How many times is he going to do this? But the real consensus and the real truth will be told over time that people are going to see the quality and actually buy it. We don't have to chase those two people who are taking advantage of it. So it's really believing in yourself, in your customers, and doing what's right, and that will turn into the business. And that was really my major thing for saying free is come. And I'm very open. I'm always at the desk. People are like, why you guys? I own this with my wife, and we're always around, and the kids are always here. It became this. It's this family. We all hang out. I mean, it's a fun zone. I mean, basically playing sports all day. I play pickleball all day. So why you're always there. And the relationship building is 100% the business. So like me talking to a random person turns into, whoa, I have a team who wants to do this. I have this, I have that. It just never ends when you're sitting and talking to people all day. And not just, I could sit at home and I can hire a front desk person and it wouldn't even affect the bottom line, but it's more about how do you want to grow this? And it's being my face is here and my wife's face and my kids are here. And that's been a very powerful thing from the free concept is they start talking to us about it. So it's not really free. They're like, tell us more about the Zumba class. Tell us. And we're there telling it from our perspective, not just the worker.
Yeah,
So
so
being involved day to day.
maybe we could put a little more meat on the bone here. So when you say free, do you just let people try things as often as they want and then you just trust them to sign up for it, or you give people an
No,
opportunity to try anything they want to do? Like
I
what's the
think
direction you give to the team?
it's interesting. So there's so many bits, so it's a little complicated. So there's like 40 revenue streams. So like if an organization comes like a cross program wants to rent it out, I mean, there's nothing. It's not about the free. That's a business model that just come. But like people are like, I want to try the gym. I want to try the class. I want to try a lesson. You come, and it's really not. It's really there is no rules. It's sort of like you build a relationship with the person. So I'm talking to them. I know what they want. I know what they're looking for. If I ever think that they're just taking advantage of it, obviously I'm going to stop it pretty quickly. So there's no hard
Yeah.
rules. And what I also do is empower my workers. That's the biggest thing we do here is nobody's allowed to say it's Jason and Erin's, which is my wife. It's our place. It's ours. So, for instance, if they get a gut feeling that something isn't right, they're empowered. I always say to my employees, if you mess up, we'll make fun of you and we'll laugh, and that's the end of it. You'll never get in trouble. But I want to empower you to make a decision. So, like, you're there, you see it, talk to it, it's yours, you understand it, pretend it's yours, and that's been powerful too. That they are empowered to not like call me or text me, and every time there has to be a decision.
Yeah, so Jason, I'm super curious now because I've heard turf, I've heard basketball court, I've heard gym, I've heard pickleball. I'm already picturing that you have like some food items or other things to keep people around. So what are all the things you have in this place and how big of a facility are we talking?
So it's 40,000 square feet. We have a
Oh,
turf, which
wow.
is 17.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty big. We have a 17,000 square foot turf that has really high ceilings and no poles. And we put up like 16 batting cages, which can slide back and forth. So you can use it to separate any which way for any sport. And in the
Yeah.
turf area, we do field hockey, we do soccer, football, baseball, softball, basically any birthday parties. And then we have two basketball courts, full-size basketball courts. On the basketball courts, we do volleyball, we do pickleball, we do futsal, which is soccer, and then we obviously do the basketball. And then we have a gym, which is basically three main rooms And then we have about 480 gym members. And then we have these other rooms here. So we have a physical therapist, we have a strength and conditioning program, we have an MMA studio, and then we have like a birthday party, like a room where it's just a big room that we do birthday parties in. So there's all different dynamics. The hardest part is the puzzle, like trying to figure out when to do things, what's more valuable, what's the best. So it's interesting what makes us the most money. People never are always surprised about the things that really make us the money, where it doesn't make us money. It's just an interesting. So what I also try to build in this business, which I always tell people is very powerful in these businesses, to I would say liquidity proof it is have recurring business, right? So like you
Yeah.
never know, like you can get stuck, people cancel on you. There's some big contracts, but the gym is a recurring business, right? Every month they get charged, we get paid. They're just taking up space. It's not like I'm giving them a product, so it's just a space thing. How many times they come, it doesn't matter. The other stuff is we have contractual obligations, but I always say to everybody, the point of a contract isn't a legal obligation for me. The point of a contract is saying, hey, this is the agreement we're doing. What am I going to sue for $4,000 contract? Like the reality of what is going to come from this contract is nothing. It's more of like, this is a handshake. Don't screw me. I won't screw you. This is the parameters of the contract. These are your times. This is the price. You want to screw it. You need us sometimes more than we need you concept. So we build that relationship. We're saying, this is a piece of paper. Sign it or not, I'm never suing you. I'll tell you from the beginning. I'm not going to sue you over $5,000, right? So, but I want to
Yeah.
make sure I have business model where there's money flowing in, regardless of if there's an issue with with contracts and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, you opened the can, so I'm going to ask the question. Uh, what did you find about what is really the most profitable stuff that you do versus the things that just kind of get people in the door? Like, what have you found really powers the business model? And was that a surprise to you, or was that something you were expecting?
I think it was what I was expecting. It was the law of numbers. So basically, doing a group, any type of group stuff, because using the same amount of space. So doing a group clinic of baseball, doing a birthday party. Birthday parties are the most profitable thing. So they're using a 1 hour on the turf, which probably makes double what we make for just renting it out. And for us, it's a small cost because we have two coaches, let's say, for a birthday party, whatever they get paid per hour, and then that's it. And then you're doubling what you're charging. It's like a premium to have a birthday party rather than just renting the turf. So that's been a big thing. And then the other thing, which I always knew, the biggest profit is really getting people to do long-term contracts over the off season. So really empowering people and helping them because it's very hard for these organizations, these sports to continue on through the summer or continue on in June or some months are rough. And it's how you manage and negotiate these contracts to be fair. Like if you want to screw someone and say same price all year round, you can, but it's a 1 year wonder, right? So you kill them once, they're done. It's how you build
Yeah.
this long-term stuff and making sure you take care of you. If they're not successful, you won 1 year. That's not a business model. So I could basically abuse them in theory and say, nope, it's this price all the way through. So when we go to off season, I'm very conscious of like, sometimes I'll let them, if they like, I can't get people this week for my soccer tournament, can I cancel? Yes. I'm not going to charge you, even though legally,
Yeah.
yes, I can charge you. So it's just being a little flexible.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about your business is the incremental cost for that turf is not much, meaning you're already spending it for it just to exist. So, can you help us understand what kind of discrepancy in pricing you see between off season versus on season in order to keep those assets being utilized, recognizing that most of that ends up being profit other than your labor you need to run it?
Sure. So the goal mine for any of these organizations is their winter. So like I mean, you could price it any way you want. But in general, I probably would say it's probably like a 20 to 30% price increase in the winter months. So from
Long
December
term.
to March 15th, you're like at a 30%. And it's not, it's the price for everybody, but I blend it for certain. If you take the whole year, it's going to be blended at a much better rate
Yeah.
type stuff. So, I mean, everybody wants the winter. I don't have any clients in this whole place of the millions of things here that just take off season. It doesn't happen. I was saying finding in the off season what sports. So like a lot of research I do is the reality. Like when people sell this and like, oh, I can rent this out. It seems like a dream for everybody. Like I'll rent out the turf all year round. It's also knowing the sports that actually make a lot of money and could afford. It's expensive, so could afford it and also play indoors all year round, which you would think. So field hockey is a big one. Lacrosse is a big one. There's other ones that don't. So in the summer it gets hot here, so a lot of the equipment. So football, some of these football teams and high schools and colleges want to use our facility because it's too hot outside. So it's just knowing who to go to. Soccer's never being played here during the summer. We have some late night leagues, but during the day, I mean, they're outside. That's just the reality of
Yeah.
the sport.
So, Jason, what has been the hardest part of this journey for you, or maybe the most unexpected? Sounds like you've had a lot of things breaking your way. What has been the most difficult?
Well, you didn't ask the negatives. There's always the challenges. This is, this, there's a million challenges. One of the hardest things is there's a couple of things. One is when you wake up every day, you can have a storm, which is my whole career, of like 500 things, and you probably know that are going wrong, right? Like, let's just say there's a leak on the toilet, there was a mess, there's a hole here, this person didn't pay. What you can go on and on. You could spend your whole life focusing on the 1% negative, or you focus on the 99% positive. So I spend I address it quickly and move on, right? Like, I don't ponder on it. I make a decision and move on. So I spend most of my day on the 99%, which is growth, business development, customer relationships, and then the 1% of the problems, which happen all the time. I mean, every 5 minutes, I'm surprised nobody's come in here in the last 10 minutes because something's going on here. I can tell you in the last 2 weeks, we've had crazy stuff going on here, which will be interesting to talk about. But so that's a big thing. But also, I'll tell you the biggest shock, and this could go on a whole nother podcast, is so this baseball program has been my passion and my dream. And I have very strong beliefs about like mental health and how to really teach the game. And I've never been more disappointed in parents in my life. Like, we must have 90 something parents, and I haven't, I'll say this to everybody. I cannot believe that I'm on the other side of the pressure, the stress, the delusion of parents. And it's not everyone always talks about it. And what it's even more profound is that everybody here as an organization has the same conversations over and over again. But I think it's gone on steroids lately in the last 10, 15 years of the helicopter and the like, all negative. For instance, I always joke with the parents. I do these parent meetings. I set expectations, and one of the powerful things about our program, which I shouldn't really say aloud, but it's true, is that I have the power. I have the belief of it's okay to say goodbye, right? So we haven't lost that many people in our program, but like, I'm not chasing the money. Remember we talked about, like, I don't need that money to make it or break it. I'm doing what I really believe. It's a passion play, especially the baseball and softball program. For me, it's a passion. It's not my only business. There's a lot of things going on here. So I won't tolerate a lot of stuff if I don't think it's right. So the ability to say goodbye is a very powerful thing in business, to say, hey, it's just not working. If I chase the money, then I can keep everybody. But it's also the interesting part is that the conversation I have with the kids all the time, it's like almost completely opposite of what the parents' expectations are. So it's been the biggest disappointment of the 2 years of me. I thought it would be a lot easier than it is, and dealing with the parents, not the kids, is unbelievable. Literally unbelievable.
Yeah. I don't know who it was, but there was some famous quote of the greatest burden on our children is the unrealized dreams of their parents. And
Yes, that's so true.
if you've ever coached competitive sports, you've seen it. In fact, when we did tryouts for baseball club teams, we would often do meetings with the parents where we would ask a lot of questions of them, because as much as we loved each of the individual kids, like, we were trying out the parents as well, because that is the hardest part about running youth sports programs. But I think the key point you're making here, Jason, that has broad applicability to other businesses is you have the ability to decide who you want to have as customers and who you don't want to have as customers. And if you just accept everyone that comes in the door, your life is going to be much more painful than if you are intentionally selective about who's a good fit. And a good fit means they happily pay you the money and get value, not they pay you the money and then complain because they're unhappy with some aspect of what's happening. So sounds like that, out of all the things you mentioned, may be the hardest thing for you. It just kind of hurts your heart to see
Yes.
what you're trying to do for these kids and how maybe some of the parents can be blockers to that.
Yeah. It's 100% that. It's funny. You just said sometimes when we do tryouts and we have all our coaches in there, nobody knows the only two things I'm looking for is coachable kids. And because there's only so much you can get at try. I don't care what age is it. There's cage monsters. We can go through the whole thing. So like, you never really know. So I'm watching the parents. I always stare at them, and I'm watching their reaction. I'm watching if the kids stare at them. So it's just interesting. I do the same. That's what I'm looking at when I walk around. But the power is like, when you're running a business, it's like you believe everything's about the dollar. And if you stop that mindset, which is the hardest thing, because you feel the stress of money and you have to pay the bills. But if you turn it just a little bit and you don't focus on money, you make much better decisions, right? So like, look, getting rid of a baseball family, is going to cost me a shitload of money. Let's be honest. But at the same time, I look at it as, what's the cost of the other side? The hell we all go through, the unhappiness, the stress. It's not worth it. But people don't quantify that because it's not monetary. So like, you gotta balance it. It's a hard balance sometimes.
I think that's a nice segue into asking you the question that's really the premise behind this podcast, and that business ownership can be a powerful path to creating the life you want, but it's not a foregone conclusion. You have to sort of choose that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your journey in these few years as a business owner and how you've used it to create a life that's fundamentally different and hopefully better than what you were living when you were in corporate America?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, actually. It's it's empowering others. It's really creating an environment that you really want. Like you really have. So I spend a lot of time. It's interesting. I wake up every day, wake up early, kids go to school. I won't come into the facility till about midday, 12 o'clock. And the first 4 hours I'm doing, some work, whatever, emails, but I also just sit in my office at home and just think about what I want and what's my, not long term, short term, what really makes me happy, what's gonna drive me today and what's gonna do in the next few weeks. So it's really about finding that passion over this journey and knowing you're gonna have some bumps and you're gonna go through some tough times and they're gonna pass and it's your composure. People always watching you, but it's surrounding yourself with the best people. And also the other thing that's been very powerful in my business is I'm a big believer that power is very evil. And why power is evil? It's actually a lonely world when you're powerful, right? If you look at all the powerful people in the world, and in my corporate world, I had a lot of people reporting to me. And when you start taking powers that you're better than someone, it's a very lonely life. Like nobody wants to talk to you, you don't know things. So when you even it out, so my conversations with all my employees, which is true, is I'm not better than you. The only thing I did different than you is I put money in it and I took the risk. Everything else we're even. We're all here doing the same thing. We all live. We all go to the bathroom. Everything in our life is the same. We're humans. So if you start building that, you build trust. And I know that this place is open 19, 20 hours a day. I could sleep at night. Like literally never closes. I think we close 2 days, 3 days a year. There's like, I don't ever say, oh, I could just sit back because there's literally nothing going on. There's always something going on. Even on Thanksgiving, we thought we were closing. Someone wants to do a tournament here. So, which is great. But at the same time, then you're going to get a call. This is going on. So it's about finding your balance and being able to walk away. Sometimes I just have to leave and say, hey, it's a day, but you empower everybody around you to help you run the business. You can't do it yourself. It's impossible.
How have you found that balance or thought and set up those boundaries for yourself?
Well, the interesting thing is, and most people would say I'm crazy, is me and my wife run this together 50-50, like literally all day, all night together. And it's just empowering. It's like you have to trust other people's decisions and you have to like, so Erin, my wife, is responsible for certain things. She makes the decisions. We discuss everything, but like you have to trust others and sometimes you may not agree with it and you have to let a little off your plate. If I took on everything, I'd be dead. Like there's thousands of things going on. Like you have to like give up some stuff and it may not be exactly the way you want it, but you have to believe in everything around you. You're gonna have, or this will be 24/7. You have no life. So it's really about empowering everybody else around you. So all my coaches have free membership. Everything's just give back a little bit and don't become you're the only one benefiting off everybody's back isn't a good business model either. So it's always about empowering others and also taking care of people and doing the right
Yeah.
thing for them and not penny pinching every single hour, every single thing with them. And the way I look at it from a business standpoint is maybe there's a $10,000 fake budget where it's just garbage. You're someone an extra hour here, this broke because of that, and you can bug out about it, or you could just know that it's in the budget. Like you're gonna have garbage stuff happen, and as long as you're doing what's right and empowering others, I think you'll do great.
Yeah, I think what you're highlighting is that empowerment has many benefits, but there's a cost to it too that you have to be willing to bear for it to work. Now, I'm curious,
Absolutely correct.
Jason, about the results of the business. How long have you had ownership of the company, and what has happened in terms of results? How much different, size wise, revenue wise, is the business from when you started?
So I've owned it for it's got to be almost 2 years, a little under 2 years now. It was probably a little less than 2 years. Our revenue is probably double, and our profit margin is probably 5x. Um, just based on all
Oh
the things we
wow,
just talked about.
that's beautiful. You've had the business for a couple of years, and it looks like over that time you've been able to increase the value, maybe 3 to 5 times what it was when you took over it.
I mean, that's definitely factually correct. So like, trust me, I don't want to. It's a lot of work, a lot of grinding, and a lot of ups and downs. I mean, we talked a lot about the positive stuff, but like I said, it's not as easy as I just came in here and did that. It's been a long grind for 2 years. A lot of fun, but it's not so simple to grow this that quick.
Well, I'm curious, Jason. I'm sure from time to time you have people come to your facility and they're impressed by what's there and they say, man, I'd love to own a business someday. What's your secret? I'm curious what you would tell those people if you could give them one piece of advice based on the experience you've had over the last handful of years, maybe all the way back to when you did the plumbing business to now with the athletic facility.
I think ironically, the thing I would always tell people is do it yourself. Like the best thing I ever did was just be my partner with my wife, and there's no other decision makers, right? So like the bottleneck in the corporate world was always the biggest problem. Like the amount of approvals. I mean, you're in the monster organization, and everything it takes forever to get done. I mean, things that I think. So what we've done, I'll tell you, the cost when we talk about the 5X, the cost maybe went up 10%. It was the efficiency is what we've done here. We made everyone much more efficient and much more doing the value added jobs that help the business rather than all the garbage stuff. And I can make a decision on a second. We do a waiver program online now. It took me 2 minutes. I logged in, I got smartwaiver.com, and now we're all using waivers here. Like I didn't have to get approval and board approval and this, and it's going to cost me $2,000 and all this stuff. So it's keeping it light at the top, and really not having the headache of another partner or too many people at the table, too much power, too many decision makers.
Yeah. Well, Jason, I think your story is really inspiring. You've got some interesting things you've done in terms of both how you thought about negotiating your deal and how you thought through taking something and creating more value with it. Because at the end of the day, that's where things start to get exciting. Yes, it's great to buy a business, but when you're able to buy that business and then add a bunch of value to it, that's what's helping create long-term wealth and probably some form of fulfillment for you. So really appreciate you taking the time to share those parts of your story with us today.
Thank you. It was great talking to you. This was very interesting.
Is there any place that you would point people, anything you want them to know or anything you want them to pay attention to?
You can come visit us in Westchester. We're in Yorktown Heights in New York, and you can check us out at eastcoastsportsandfitness.com.
eastcoastsportsandfitness.com. Awesome. Thanks again, Jason.
Thank you, buddy.
Thanks for listening to the Create the Life You Want podcast. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to future episodes by clicking the subscribe button, you know where. If you're an aspiring business owner, you may also want to subscribe to the Create the Life You Want newsletter for more inspiration and tips delivered to your inbox every week. You can find the link to that in the show notes, as well as on my personal website, jeremyames.com. If you've already decided you want to start or buy a business, consider exploring your financing options by heading to our sponsor's website at www.guidantfinancial.com. That's GUIDANT financial.com. See you in the next episode.